For those of you on the fence about the M1 MacBook Air, maybe these numbers might help you make a decision. What's up everybody? The M1 MacBook Air is a big leap for Apple as it moves away from the Intel chips and architecture that it's been using for the last 15 years. All that sounds nice, but how does this change translate for the user? Do we get a machine that satisfies our need for more speed? Well, let's find out. Today, the M1 MacBook Air I have here is the base model with 8 gigs of RAM and a 7-core integrated GPU. I'll be comparing a bunch of the results to a 2018 Intel i5 Mac Mini with 32 gigs of RAM just to show the relative difference in performance. We'll start off here with Geekbench. There are 3 tests that Geekbench can run, so let's go through them all. For the first test, the Air has a single core score of 1746 and a multi-core score of 7652. Looking at the scores from the 2000 i5 Mac Mini, it's really no contest. The Air is giving us an almost 70% increase in single core and over 40% increase in multi-core performance over the Intel Mini. Let's take a look at some of the other tests. And it seems that the integrated GPU in the M1 totally outclasses the Intel offering with an over 300% increase in OpenCL and over 400% increase in metal performance. I want to note here that the 2018 Mac Mini is no slouch and puts up better multi-core scores than the fastest mid-2020 13-inch MacBook Pro. That being the case, this M1 Air is already looking to be a much faster replacement to any 13-inch MacBook that you may own. We'll use Cinebench to tell us how our performance is after any thermal throttling takes effect. For a multi-core 10-minute plus run, the M1 Air scored 6684. Single-core thermal throttling is usually non-existent, but I ran it anyway, so here's the score for that. That's 1490. In comparison, the Intel Mac Mini scored 5960 on multi-core and 1064 on single-core. While the difference here is not as big as with the Geekbench test, we do still see a decisive victory for the M1 Air. If we do a single run of the test, we can see that the scores are a fair bit higher with 7533 for the multi-core score, which is evidence that there is some sort of thermal throttling going on. One thing to note here is that the Mac Mini has much more thermal headroom than a laptop and experiences very minimal thermal throttling, which gets it closer to the M1 Air's performance. But the Air is an extreme handicap here, being a laptop with much less thermal headroom. In fact, the Air doesn't even have an internal fan or an air vent. Despite this though, it's still up to the challenge and pulls off another win here. Macs have never been known to be gaming machines, but some people still do use them from time to time to game on, so let's see how it runs the Unigine Heaven benchmark. I'll go ahead and run it on basic settings to start with because usually any machine without a discrete GPU usually struggles even with this setting. And we end up with an average of 79.4 FPS, which I know is way better than what my Mac Mini ran in the past. I'm going to go ahead and run it again on the most recent version of macOS to see how it does though. And yeah, the M1 Air completely destroys the Mac Mini. Note also that the M1 Air is running Unigine Heaven using Rosetta, which is translation software to take an app written to run on Intel processors and translating it so that it can run on the M1 processor. Now there are more details behind this, but basically the M1 is handicapped because this translation makes things run slower than they would if the app had been written to run natively on the M1. That being said, while I still wouldn't consider the M1 Air a gaming machine, it's definitely much more capable than those that came before it. Geekbench has native support for the M1, so this comparison to the Mac Mini should be a better demonstration of the performance of the GPU with apps that can run natively on the M1. There are a lot of tests and numbers here, but it's clear that the M1 Air is way ahead of the Intel Mac Mini. Recent versions of Affinity Photo now come with a built-in benchmark that you can run, so let's go ahead and try that one too. Once again, the M1 wins easily. Similar to the other tests, we're seeing a decent increase in CPU performance, but a huge increase in GPU performance. Let's also see how fast the internal SSD is. Nowadays, to me, any SSD, be it internal or external, is way more than fast enough for my needs. But for those in need of the fastest speeds possible, here are the results so that you can go ahead and decide for yourself. There's no doubt here that the new M1 MacBook Air delivers excellent performance in its class. This is a machine that I can easily recommend to 99% of the people I know. For the average user and even many power users, it brings high performance in a small, portable form factor, which gives you the freedom to work at or away from your desk with almost no compromises in performance. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take it easy.